Hi there, my name is Jared Mello, and I'm a mindset coach and relationship coach. And today I would like to talk about a different topic, which is the opiate crisis and perhaps a way to prevent some of it from happening. I've been seeing an OD on my Facebook page about once or twice a week, and it's really become outrageous. And I've seen even back at the end of March, Tony Luke's son overdosed and died. And so I wanted to put something out there, which is my spin on the situation here. But first, I'd like to tell a story about an anti-opiate task force I was at about 5 years ago in Camden. Jim McGreevy was there, along with other prominent members of society. And there was a woman, a mother, whose son had overdosed and died. And she was telling the story of the night he passed. She was saying how at 2 a.m. there was a knock at the door, and it was the police. And she remembered praying that her son was just in jail. And her husband went down to answer the door, and the police told him the news, and he collapsed in agony. And then the mother knew that her son was dead. And it was a really powerful story. And from that point on, she mentioned that her mission was to prevent things like that from happening to anyone else. And she mentioned the prevention model analogy, which is the river. And the river is supposed to represent drug addiction and things like NA, AA, detox, rehabs, sober livings, etc. They're supposed to rescue people from the river. And the prevention model says, why are people falling in the river to begin with? And that's what the prevention model is focused with. How do we prevent people from falling in the river, from starting drugs? Now, at the time, I had thought there was no way. I had thought if someone's an addict, that's it. But since then, I have most certainly amended my response. And I think that proper mental health awareness could be extremely valuable in preventing others from going down the route of drug abuse, and specifically opiate abuse. Now, to speak further about this in detail, I have to share a little bit about my story with opiate abuse. I had had severe anxiety starting at the time I was about 12 or 13 years old, and eventually I started to pick up recreational drugs like weed and alcohol, which were okay, but I still, for the most part, felt a lot of mental health symptoms at all times. And this was the case until I found opiates. And the opiates seemed to self-medicate my anxiety, which was pretty severe, better than any other thing I'd ever found. And I was able to be confident. I'd had false self-esteem, but self-esteem nonetheless. I was able to be comfortable in social situations. I was able to speak to girls, all the things that I really just couldn't do because of my crippling anxiety. And I would not wish this crippling anxiety upon anyone, but as you can imagine, once somebody finds an alternative, such as opiates, to medicate themselves and feel good, as opposed to their baseline, which is mentally ill in my case, which is below normal, it can be very appealing to want to continue to go back to that behavior or thing, or drug in this case, over and over and over again. And that's what I did. And for a while, it progressed until I'd gone to a rehab, but I still wasn't ready to stop doing this yet. I was still undiagnosed mentally ill. And that's what mental illness does to people, though. It's like that line from Usual Suspects that says the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. And that's what mental illness does. We don't know we have it until later down the line when a lot of self-awareness has come our way. But at the time, I had no idea I was. And so I went through rehab, and I still wasn't ready to get better. I still had all this anxiety in me. And the first day I left was the first day I tried heroin. And that was even better and stronger than all the other opiates I was doing. And there were times when I was driving to Camden with 3 other people, and all 3 of those people, they're dead now, except for me. And it makes me think that I was spared for some sort of reason to hopefully influence some good into the world. And basically, my abuse of this drug, heroin, got worse and worse. I picked up a felony along the way, and it only stopped when I went on a drug replacement drug called Suboxone. And what Suboxone did for me was it self-medicated my anxiety just enough so that I didn't want to do opiates anymore. I'd still done other drugs at first because I still didn't really have a desire to completely get better yet, but I did have a desire to stop going down to Camden and being dope sick and etc. And the Suboxone allowed me and alleviated my anxiety enough so that I could picture life without it. Before that, I couldn't even picture life without it because what I didn't realize was every time I got off the drug, I was just returning to my mental health symptoms, and they were getting worse. And every time I rebounded, my mental health would get worse. And this was my experience with it. And then eventually, after a few years of just being on Suboxone, I ripped off the Band-Aid and I got off of Suboxone. And thankfully, I had a great support system at the time, and I did not go back to any further drug use, but my anxiety did certainly skyrocket, and I was convinced that eventually I would get quote-unquote comfortable in my own skin after enough clean time, after enough steps, etc. But this wasn't really the case for me. Things got better, and I'd say that nothing really great happened, but also nothing really bad happened during this time when I was unmedicated, on nothing. And it took about 4 years of me being off of everything to start to realize that something else was wrong. And the first indicator of this for me was when I was getting manic off of caffeine. And then when I didn't have caffeine and my caffeine cocktail, I would be sunk into a bipolar low. And for people to understand what that's like, mania is when I would get extremely ambitious, I'd get racing thoughts, I'd feel confident on top of the world, I'd have obsessions and compulsions about sex, etc. But then on the flip side, there would be the depression. And the depression of this would be me just seeing everything through a lens of doom and gloom. And I would picture myself hopping in front of a car, jumping off bridges, hanging myself multiple times a day. And this was my reality. And it was at that point I realized that something is wrong here. Something's up with this picture. And I started to realize that perhaps I had bipolar. Because at this point, like I said, I was on nothing. I was on no drugs. I didn't smoke. I was in great health. I worked out all the time. I had a good diet. I prayed. I was doing meditation. And in my experience, none of that is sufficient to overcome a true mental illness. There's a scientific component going on here that cannot be overlooked. And that component is our neurotransmitters, our GABA, our norepinephrine, our serotonin, our dopamine. If they're not firing properly, we will experience the discomfort of that. And there's just no other way around it. And during this time, I think the only thing that kept me going was just the thought of my next tattoo at the time. Literally saved my life. It was the only thing I was looking forward to. And I'd even put myself into situations where I would say to myself, I'll do this tattoo, or I'll go gamble, or I'll do something else because it's better than hanging myself. And I don't wish these kinds of thoughts upon anyone, but it's the way it was for me. And I'm trying to do some good with it now. So eventually, I came to find some mental health treatment. I chose a natural supplementation route, which had its own issues to begin with, but I think it's extremely important to get checked out. Go to a doctor. Go find someone that can help you with this, because in my experience, it does not go away on its own. It has to be taken care of. It has to be treated. And I think that if people were to get their mental health treated at an earlier age, they may not want to self-medicate with drugs nearly as much. And again, I'll emphasize, this will not save everyone. This will not stop everyone from taking drugs. But I do think it could prevent some people from starting to take drugs because they can finally be okay with nothing. They can just be at a level where they can enjoy life without having to use drugs. Because when mental health is untreated and you're continuing to self-medicate with illegal drugs, every time you come off, those mental health symptoms will just return with a vengeance. And that's no fun either. And I don't want people to have to deal with the anxiety, the depression, the bipolars, the ups and downs of all of that. It's not a very fun life. And the sobering statistics about bipolar disorder are 10% of people who have bipolar commit suicide, 50% of the people who have bipolar attempt to commit suicide, and 80% have suicidal idealizations. And I have certainly had those. But for me, since I've sought to get treatment for this disorder, 90% of the time I would say I am night and day better than I ever used to be. And for that, I am extremely grateful. I don't believe that it can ever go away completely. There is still about 5 to 10% of the time where I will feel pretty crappy again. But it does always pass. And I'm just extremely lucky and extremely grateful to be okay 90% of the time. And I think if this message were to be shared with others, I think it really could save a life out there. Because even the people who are clean right now, if they're mentally ill and it's untreated, they are also living half of a life. And I'm here to say it could get better. If you're someone who has been clean for multiple years and you still experience a lot of anxiety and extreme depressions or bipolar swings, go to a doctor and check it out, because chances are your neurotransmitters are just misfiring. And again, this is not going to be the case for everyone. I've met people who really were just addicts, and they tell me that I wasn't depressed, I wasn't really anxious, I was just kind of bored, and I wanted to have more fun. This is not a message for them. This is a message for the people who are experiencing extreme anxiety, extreme depression, etc. And hopefully, the younger this gets recognized, the less likely people will be to be self-medicating with drugs. And I think if this message gets out there, perhaps some people will not even take it to begin with, and their lives can be saved. So that is all I have. Hopefully this message is able to help some people, and have a good rest of your day.